This podcast deals with themes, languages, and situations that may not be suitable for young audiences. If you're under the age of 18, parental guidance isn't going to help you here. Welcome to Now Open the Podcast, the sex education podcast that's more sex than education. I'm Trisha.
My name is Kai.
And I am Jobim. This week we talk about the nuances involved when talking about sex and sexuality, because it seems like with every new ideology, the pendulum tends to swing a little bit too far both ways before settling somewhere down in the middle. And it's not uncommon for social movements to be co-opted, weaponized, or corrupted. Like the sound on this video every time a motorcycle passes by. With liberal ideas having been on the up and up these past few years, it's only par for the course that we're starting to feel some sort of pushback in some subtle and not so subtle ways. How we talk about sex is constantly evolving, so let's dive into where the conversation is today and how we got there. This is part one of How We Talk About Sex, where we'll talk about how the conversation around the anti-porn movement is changing, or not, and the nuances of feminism, self-policing, and sex work. Trigger warnings: sex, sexuality, rape, consent, sexual assault, misogyny, kink, and abuse, and/or abuse.
If you're listening live, and Jobim, take it away.
If you're listening live and you like what you hear, you can join the discussion by leaving a comment below. And if we have time, we'll get to them as the show goes on. Okay, let's kick things off with the juicy bits. Here's the anti-porn movement. What? People who don't like porn? Yes, it's true. They exist. The anti-porn movement has been around since the fig leaf. But the modern movement as we know it goes as far back as the 1970s, most notably in the U.S. Carolyn Bronstein, who literally wrote the book on the subject, author of Battling Pornography, the American Feminist Anti-Pornography Movement, 1976 to 1986, talks about how the anti-porn movement grew from a disagreement between the lesbian BDSM community in the San Francisco Bay Area and the feminist anti-pornography movement, who were concerned with the potential social harm of depicting violence in ways that foster oppression. Do you guys know this?
No.
The anti-porn movement started with the BDSM community. With a
that
lesbian
makes a
BDSM
lot of sense and is also really disheartening.
Well, yeah, because the National Organization for Women, or NOW, declared in 1980 that sadomasochism and pornography constituted violence, not sex, and were inherently dangerous, right? They wanted what was best for women at the time, but had very different views as to what the quote-unquote best actually was. At the beginning, it wasn't even about pornography. You see, initially, the feminist anti-pornography movement was not about opposing media images of sex, but sexual violence, believing that, quote, the glorified images of sexual violence evident in mainstream advertising, television, and Hollywood films taught women to accept brutal treatment as their due, and taught men that rape, battering, and other forms of physical abuse were normal and expected part of male sexuality. Their goal was to depict men and women in socially responsible ways, not ban pornography. So how did we get to the anti-porn movement from, hey, let's have porn where men don't beat women up?
I will say, though, that like this kind of attitude where we correlate sexuality with violence or like put them on the same level is still seen today, where you look at movie rating boards or whatever. They rate action films where there's like lots of death and, you know, people getting hurt as like more okay for younger audiences than a consensual almost wholesome kiss between two
Right.
people of the same sex. And like you can
Right.
see how they're kind of like equating like expressions of sexuality and like violence, even just with things like that.
I mean, video games. I mean, like you can have hundreds upon hundreds of shoot 'em up video games where people are blowing each other's heads off, but God forbid you can get a hooker in one of them. You know what I mean? Or have sex in one of them. It's just not.
Right.
It's somehow worse. But yeah, how did we get to anti-pornography if all they wanted was just like fair depictions of men and women in mainstream media? Due to the need for recruitment, the need to generate funding, and pressure from news media, basically, regular internal politics when you're an organization and no longer just a movement. Among other factors, these organizations made a strategic and media savvy choice to put the anti-violence agenda aside in favor of a broader, easier to digest message, finding an easy target in pornography, which was a hotly debated topic at the time. You have to remember, this was in the 80s, the Reagan era, right? This was say no to drugs. This was hyper conservatism. This was traditional values 2.0 on steroids, right? So
Right.
when these feminists who just wanted more responsible depictions of men and women in pornography found that we have an atmosphere where we can have a voice here. We just have to target the right thing, right? They did the next best thing for themselves and just went after pornography across the board. And you know what? Reagan America ate it up. They were like, nom, 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 nom. I love this anti-porn thing. It's corrupting the children. It's horrible. The November, and this continued, right? All the way up until the 90s. So if you think that this anti-porn thing, we have articles all the way in 2016 talking about, anti-porn is gaining followers, it's gaining traction. Oh no, this is an article from November of 1992 from The Atlantic, which featured an article entitled "Feminists Against the First Amendment," that talks about how right-wing activists advocating traditional values co-opted feminist rhetoric by focusing the blame of violence against women on pornography. So you see how they can attack the rhetoric from different points of view to just
Right.
fit whatever narrative they want, depending on what point in time we are in history.
Right.
In 1992, now it's about by focusing the blame on pornography, we are negating all the other influences, the systematic influences that promote violence against women. So you're shutting other people up, right? So over time, the message just gets a little bit confused depending on whose agenda we're following.
Right.
This constant tug of war in the conversation about pornography and women's rights continues today, with all the same players dressed up a little differently. In 2016, the Washington Post published, "The anti-porn movement is growing. The public is just catching up," after Utah passed a resolution declaring pornography as, quote, "a public health crisis." Too many people jerking off in Utah, I guess. In 2015, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, this is concerning, right? Because you hear an organization has a name like the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, and you're like, these must be good guys, right?
Right.
Successfully persuaded Walmart to remove Cosmopolitan from checkout stands, citing hypersexualized media bombarding young girls.
Oh my God. Okay.
So yeah, so like, where do we draw the line, right? When we talk
Right.
about these things, it's such a slippery slope because you can agree with one thing and then roll your eyes at the next, but they're essentially fighting for the same thing. The anti-porn movement has gained new traction thanks to the kind of rhetoric that thrives in the hashtag #MeToo era. A 2018 article from The Guardian talks about how conservative rhetoric is being used to capitalize on the growing atmosphere of gender consciousness, saying porn has been cast as empowering by some feminists, but activists say that misses the choicelessness of the vast majority of women who work in the industry, many of whom are forced into it by economic necessity or other circumstance. So now the framework is being retooled because we're talking about agency and we're talking about consent. So it's the same old argument, but just dressed
Right. And
up.
it always just differs per like historical context, but it's the same thing that's just really not progressing. Like,
I have a
mhm.
I have a
Go ahead.
feeling that this argument or this idea of empowerment versus wala ka ng no choice under capitalism. I feel like this is going to come up a lot today because I feel like
Yep.
a lot of this can really be summed up into that idea of class, where in a world where we are all slaves to the wages, and we all have to participate in this oppressive, exploitative system. Otherwise, you can literally die,
Hmm.
or you won't have like a very good life. Then can you make these choices? That's,
Right.
I think, going to be a question that we're going to be seeing a lot today.
I think
Definitely.
the reason that the anti-porn movement gains so much traction every once in a while is because it's kind of a uh, it's kind of an easy uh, catch-all movement to hop onto when you're addressing uh, corruption of the youth or
Mhm.
or uh, or feminism at
Right.
any given
You know,
time.
like I'm actually writing like my thesis right now on like the youth and sex ed, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what I'm finding is that the argument that people often have when it comes to the youth is that they cannot make their own choices. And like, for example, with sex ed, it's like they've consulted literally everyone about the sex ed curriculum except those
Except the kids.
kids. Except the kids. Not, I mean, not like little kids, but like kids who who want to know certain things. And
Hmm.
I feel this idea that we always have to protect, like, that we have to protect the children no matter what, which makes sense. But where do you draw the line between, like, allowing kids to kind of figure out for themselves what
Hmm.
things should be versus going for your own agenda, masking it as like protecting the kids? Diba?
I
Right.
mean, I think it's even funny that protect the kids is an argument that comes up because there is a reason why porn is 18 plus. I mean, of
Yes.
course, if we are being realistic, none of us waited till we were 18.
Oh no. Fuck
You know,
no.
I
Yeah.
remember even doing
Like,
the
don't do
math
that,
in my
guys.
head just so I remembered exactly what year I need to input, just so it's like 18, 19, 20 years old, somewhere there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you knew
And
every year you had to change it in your mind. Like this was the
and
year I was
like
born.
I remember when I turned 18, one of the first things I thought of was, yay, I don't have to fake my age anymore. I was like one of the
I
things I was
super get
excited
that.
about. So I get it.
I
Like
was
there
like
are
that
kids
too.
watching this.
Before
Why
we
did
No.
get
you start
further into the
watching porn?
discussion tonight,
Mhm.
here is the newsstand. For more than a year, Sonia Doe faced humiliating strip searches in front of male guards, faced sexual harassment, discrimination, and physical threats from correction officers and inmates alike. Joe, who was a trans woman, was transported to four different men's prisons across New Jersey from March 2018 to August 2019. And it took a lawsuit filed that August for Doe to finally be transported to a woman's prison weeks later. And as part of the settlement for that lawsuit, the New Jersey Department of Corrections will now make it customary for prisoners who identify as transgender, intersex, or non binary to be assigned a prison stay in line with their gender identity and not with the sex they were assigned to at birth.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like,
congratulations to the
mhm.
to the institutionalized slavery system in America. That is a step forward in the right direction.
It's like that meme about yeah, I heard the next missiles will be sent by a woman. It's kind of like that. It's like
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah. I
Right,
mean, look,
right.
this is a very real issue facing trans prisoners in the U.S. And since so many other countries follow suit with U.S. legislature, I think any small progress in the right direction is a win.
Hmm.
Absolutely, because
Definitely.
staying in prison ideally should be rehabilitative and not like punitive,
Hmm.
and
Mhm.
Hmm.
put trans people through like all that dysphoria all over
Yeah.
again by assigning them to like the wrong prison. Like that's an extra level of cruelty that should not be present in any prison system ever.
Mhm.
You know. So I'm glad that they're doing this, but also abolish the for-profit prison system of the
Mhm.
United States.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think that, like, I've read a few things about like how, I mean, that like the correction system in the states is very skewed, at least in the racial on racial matters, like what I've read about thus far. Like I learned that um there's more black people in the prison
Mhm.
system in the States as compared to like how many black people were enslaved during the slave trade now,
Mhm.
like today.
Are you for
And
reals?
Yep.
yeah, in the new Jim Crow, that was what she wrote about. And
Mhm.
um like, and having read this newsstand for this news bit, it makes me think, like, is how are the other ways that the justice system is skewed? Like, is this like how is this something that it makes me doubt it? Like, is this something that's really a step in the right direction, or is this still like something that, you know, is kind of like, is it something that they're masking in order to do something else? I don't know. I'm just being like, I guess I'm just so doubtful when it comes to like the justice system,
Yeah.
that
It's
like
it's
whenever something good happens, I'm like, what's the catch? You know?
it's definitely
Yeah.
something good being done in an institution that is undoubtedly evil, right? So it's
Right.
like
Right.
it's a double-edged sword. It's a bittersweet situation. It's like saying, "Oh, the slaves are now being given 2 meals a day." So like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yay,
Exactly.
yay, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
that was the newsstand. Now sitting down. Now back to the show. I think Trisha and Kai might have a lot to say about this next bit because it's about feminism, sex work, and the self-policing and the pressure that intersectional feminists uh, experience just by being. You always constantly have to. It's a minefield you have to navigate. Sarah J. Baker describes in her essay the unbearable wokeness of women, the kind of self-policing that women, particularly intersectional feminists, encounter often. Intersectional feminists are in a constant state of checking their privilege and monitoring their language, hyper vigilant in their efforts to be inclusive, not appropriating, not erasing, all around decent human beings. The video essay, Everything Wrong with Woke Culture and Its Impact on Feminism, looks at what it calls woke feminism through the lens of popular movies and TV shows, both original properties like Mulan and Captain Marvel, and female led vehicles like the Charlie's Angels and Ghostbusters reboots. In it, the author points out why she preferred certain female characters over ones that didn't work, offering the criticism that the emphasis on the character's femininity or feminine identity was heavy handed, or in the case of Batgirl, unearned. The true criticism, however, is that any of the criticisms of these characters is immediately invalidated as hate. Thereby, she felt policed. She felt like she had to check herself all the time, pointing out that woke feminism thinks that if you don't like these characters, then you are sexist. This is the next mistake of woke feminism. There is no such thing as legitimate criticism. No, any criticism of these totally incredible characters must be born out of bitter jealousy and a deep desire to keep women down. That if you dislike a female character, it's because she possesses power, and we are more comfortable with seeing women in subservient positions. Even we women who criticize them don't apparently realize the years of brainwashing we've undergone that has told us that a woman's place is one step behind a man, if not in the kitchen. Do you guys experience pushback from uh, women who call themselves feminists or women who don't align with that? And how does that feel as somebody who is so in touch with what it is exactly you were fighting for?
Oh my god, like, I've experienced this so many times, especially like, um given that, my advocacy is really, it really boils down to women's sexual rights, to
Right.
women's reproductive rights. That's really like what I stand for. And I have been called a fake feminist. I've been called like a white feminist with brown skin, because of how I stand for like sexuality and reproduction, and how we should be able to harness these rights. And I think the issue is, like, we're feminism, it's not like other movements where they can really be one consolidated whole. In
Mhm.
feminism, everyone inside is like, there might be like, there's this agreement that, fine, yeah, all women are oppressed, right? That there's that agreement that women are oppressed in some way, and there's an effort to change that situation. But the way we understand how women are oppressed, how we should change it, is different per like strand of feminism, and everyone thinks they're right. Well,
Mhm.
and it's, like, I think I'm right, they think they're right, and when one party thinks they're, when right versus right goes against each other, I think that's when like issues really do like that's when division happens mostly. And I think
Sarah
that's
J.
kind of the issue. Yeah, go ahead.
Sarah J. Baker actually talks about it in her essay. About how because female rage has so long been suppressed by has been oppressed by men, it has been suppressed for such a long time, and feminists are constantly having to walk this tightrope of trying to fight for change and trying to be like a model feminist, right? And so you're constantly on edge, and you're all this all this pressure is on you. So when you see a fellow feminist or another woman step out of line, it's that much more, you feel that much more obligated to say something.
I think I'd like to go to one of the examples you used earlier to kind of
Yes.
explore this better. Ghostbusters, right? And
Right.
Charlie's Angels, the
Hmm.
reboots. Well, maybe
Hmm.
not Charlie's Angels because that was already a female-led property. So,
Hmm.
like Ghostbusters, because you suddenly turn a traditionally very male depiction, like a male narrative, a male story, and then you put four hilarious women at the forefront, especially
Hmm.
with the whole idea, women can't be funny, blah, blah, blah. And okay, the thing is, I thought it was great that we're doing a female Ghostbusters. I thought that was awesome. The movie was bad, but like in an enjoyable way.
Yeah.
Like these are, like, I mean, like obviously my taste might be very different from yours, but I thoroughly enjoyed the movie, even though it wasn't like it's not peak cinema. But then you're as a feminist, you're kind of like I was on guard a little bit when looking at criticism of it
Hmm.
because you're never sure if the person behind the criticism is doing it because they really thought the movie was bad and here are the points to support it, or if they didn't even
Right.
give it a fair shot
Right.
because it has four women and they're ruining my childhood.
Which brings us back to the point of, people who are against people who want to attack the Ghostbusters reboot from uh, a malicious standpoint with regards to feminism can always just say it can take your fair opinion of it's a bad movie and reframe it to, oh, it must be a bad movie because it's for women, right?
Yeah, the issue really is when you make the assumption that it's misogyny behind
Right.
behind
Right.
the criticism, because I mean, obviously, using the woman card isn't always good either, because there are women with internalized misogyny. That's like just because a
Mhm.
woman says it doesn't mean it's true or whatever. But yeah, you have to think about that. You have to think about how it's just that extra anxiety, and that sucks because then like you get used to acting or get used to assuming that people are acting in bad faith, and
Right.
because of that, you're more hostile.
Hmm.
And that's why I don't necessarily want to even ascribe this to like woke feminism, because I
Hmm.
really, while we were developing this episode, I was really wary about like pinning this on wokeness, because as we said, like feminism is it's full of different people with different views on different ideas on how to get equality, right?
I think,
And
yeah,
yeah.
and I I think that's also why it's so dangerous, because what I feel like the author of that video was ascribing to woke feminism, right? Is the pushback that she's feeling? She's the pushback that the author is feeling from what she sees as a kind of feminism that is excluding her from the conversation, right? A form of feminism that is silencing her. She goes on. She says, "We apparently don't realize the years of brainwashing we've undergone," calling this version of feminism sort of condescending, right? And what you were saying earlier, not being accepting of legitimate criticism because they're constantly on the defense. But yeah, this whole article, this whole attitude towards women extends to sex work, right? How they twist the rhetoric extends to sex work, and I know we've talked about this several times already on past podcasts, but it's worth revisiting today. As activists, as anti porn activists see it, porn and sexual assault were but different points on a single continuum of sexual violence. The key difference was that there was an entrenched financial interest behind pornography and to a lesser extent prostitution. It's the same old thing we keep on hearing again and again. The difference between prostitution and battery, incest, and rape is that there's nothing like the money in pornography and prostitution, says Melissa Farley, a clinical psychologist and the founder of the San Francisco-based prostitution research and education. What's worse, they say, is that assuming sex workers have a choice in their profession implies they signed up for the abuse and other mistreatments to which they are often exposed. Okay, let's try to unbox this right now, okay? Because it's coming from Melissa Farley, who says, it's like they shouldn't have the agency. No sex work bad. She's like, sex work bad. But then she goes on to say that what they're saying assumes that sex workers have a choice. Having a choice in their profession implies that they signed up for the abuse and other mistreatments to which they are often exposed. There's a lot to unbox.
I feel that's a very black and white thinking situation.
Right.
A very black and white thinking situation.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it's like, okay, sex work because of this equals this. And there is no other in between. There is no other color except it's bad or good. And, we all, at least in this podcast, we know that, nothing is black and white ever.
Right.
Because as what you mentioned earlier, we're talking about nuances in how we talk about sex. And it can extend to literally everything in such a way that, like, nuances of every situation, whether it be sex work, feminism, whether it be the anti-porn movement, it will always have that gray area is always going to be made of nuance. So how is Melissa Farley to say that, like, it's this horrible thing when she accounted for literally every single sex worker's experience,
And she has a blanket statement saying that the only difference between prostitution, battery, incest, and rape is that there's no money, right? That the only difference is the transaction of money involved, right? But then here's the thing.
Oh, sorry. I was going to talk about, you know what, Jabim, you go.
Go on. I'm just gonna read the next. You go on.
All right. So I have some Twitter mutual friend people who are sex workers, and they're always talking about how yes, there are some times that they are mistreated as sex workers, but for a lot of them, it's actually a more common experience to have been harassed at their vanilla jobs. And in fact, the harassment that they experienced at vanilla jobs, like being a waitress, for example, or being an assistant to somebody, they were actually exposed to even more violence and harassment from like their superiors, from clients, from other people in the workplace. And it was either no different or worse there. Because at least in sex work, you have that, especially as you go through it, you learn to draw boundaries. You're able to screen your clients. You're able to create, more safeguards for yourself. Unlike in a vanilla job where you can't really always put your foot down, and it's like, again, the same kind of abuse. Women are subject to all of these things, no matter what job you work. Okay. Even if you work in a call center, even if you work at Jollibee, even if you work at, like, no matter where you work, you are vulnerable to these things. And you don't sign up for it anywhere else. You don't sign up for it when you work retail or you work a restaurant.
That's right. Let's go over real quick about how, because we have just a little bit of time left. Let's go over real quick about how they use statements that you agree with, statements where you're like, yeah, that makes absolute sense, to get you on board with their point, how they play their rhetoric out. Okay. She goes on to say, slaves have been blamed for their own enslavement. Remember, this is the woman we don't agree with. Slaves have been blamed for their own enslavement. Okay, check. Children have been blamed for provoking their own sexual abuse. Check. And women in prostitution have been blamed. 3 statements that we all agree with. But then she argues that by logical extension, Me Too must include prostitutes and porn actresses. Our worst nightmares are their daily experiences. given that the nature of their work constantly puts them at risk for harassment, unwanted sexual advances, and rape. And I think Trisha just talked to that point, right? So they wrap things that we agree with things that are a little black and white.
And this
And
goes back to what Trisha said earlier, how like we equate or we put sexuality and violence in the same box and
Mhm,
then extend it over to like literally everything that can be extended over into. It's like,
mhm,
parang like it's not, as you said, black and white. And
mhm.
as I said, black and white. There's so much more to it, so much more nuance.
Well, I mean, if you want a more nuanced conversation on feminism and sex work, we're not going to dive too deep into this now, but we did
Mhm.
dedicate an entire episode to this topic. So if you want to catch more of our take on that and also hear from a sex worker herself and a person with a degree in an actual real degree in like sex trafficking and how we talk about these topics. So
Mhm.
we have that up, I believe, on Spotify already, and you can also check it out on YouTube and Facebook.
All right. That is it for part one of how we talk about sex. Make sure to stay tuned for part two, where we'll talk about sexual misconduct and Puritans.
Producer, why don't you take us to our music break? Wow, that is a really
What's that?
short clip.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be much
I was
longer.
I was gonna come in like,
Yeah.
but I was like,
Hello.
oh, okay.
Hello.
Hi,
All
what's
right.
up?
Well,
was,
that was Summer
yeah.
by Lily, an indie music artist from Manila who you may know as the lovely person behind the backup vocals and keyboards of the Ransom Collective. The music video for this song was just released on YouTube, and you can stream their music now on Spotify. So if you're an artist that wants to be featured on the show, we'd be absolutely honored. Please send us your clips, and you can send that to nowopenph@gmail.com.
All right. Welcome back to Now Open the Podcast, the sex education podcast that's more sex than education. My name is Jobin.
I'm Trisha.
And I am Kai.
I went to visit my friend earlier this week, and she has these parents, which are, I guess, in their 60s, and I've known them since I was in high school. And I told them about the sex podcast, and they were like, "Oh, that's lovely." And they go, "Tell us more about your sex podcast." And I go, "It's called Now Open PH for the sex education podcast. That's more sex than education." And they went nuts. They loved it. So, guys, I think we have like an uncornered market in the 60 to 70 range that we're not tapping right now.
We should get to that.
If you have elder relatives, please teach them how to
Yes.
use Spotify and
Listen to our show. Okay, so this week we're talking about the nuances and the conversations surrounding sex and sexuality today, where we are, how we got there, all that good stuff. This is part two of how we talk about sex, where we'll talk about Aziz Ansari in the age of #MeToo and the Zoomers who just want a cleaner internet, or do they? Trigger warnings: sex, sexuality, rape, consent, sexual assault, misogyny, kink, and abuse. All right, so let's talk about Aziz Ansari. Were you guys fans of Aziz Ansari?
Kebs lang.
Yeah, no, not so much.
It's like he's there. He's not like
He's
someone I'm like,
funny.
I don't know, because I loved Aziz Ansari. To me, he was the little brown Woody Allen, and little did I know how accurate that was going to be. In 2018, actor and comedian Aziz Ansari was accused of sexual assault through a Babe.com article in which a woman using the pseudonym Grace recounted the events of her date with Ansari, that she described as, quote, "by far the worst experience with a man I've ever had." Grace told Babe that Ansari repeatedly ignored her growing discomfort and the concern she voiced and tried to pressure her into sex. At one point, Grace told Babe that she voiced that she didn't want to feel forced, and Grace said that Ansari seemed to understand until he suggested they chill on the couch, where he, quote, sat back and pointed to his penis and motioned for me to go down on him. Grace says she felt pressured to go along with it, not knowing how to extricate herself from the situation, and eventually left his apartment in tears. Ansari released a statement on January 14 in which he said they engaged in sexual activity, which by all indications was completely consensual, and that when he heard that it was not the case for her, I was surprised and concerned. End quote. As of January 16, the Babe piece had more than 25 million views, but the divided reaction to it was almost immediate. Okay, here's the interesting thing about the Aziz Ansari case, is because it was happening during the Me Too era. And here was a successful, powerful guy being called out for. I mean, it was just an everyday thing at that point. It's something you expected, a new allegation to come out. And I think this was the turning point for a lot of people. Kind of like when Tom Hanks got COVID and the rest of the world was like, oh, this is serious. Once Aziz Ansari got Me Too'd, I think people started looking at it with more discernment, I guess. That you hear about Harvey Weinstein and all these guys being like, yeah, that guy looks like a fucking creep. They was like, yeah, down with the patriarchy. And then all of a sudden somebody who we thought was an ally, somebody who would, go up on stage and deliver, these bits about feminism and go on and talk about feminism and write books about love. He had a book out about love, modern romance, right? For him to come out with this, people for the first time started giving the guy the benefit of the doubt again, so it kind of changed things a little bit.
I think what was different about Aziz Ansari's case, especially when you compare it to the other big reckoning in the comedy scene, which was Louis C.K., which I think came out before Ansari's, right? Like, it was already revealed that Louis C.K. had been flashing people and masturbating in front of them, which is very clear. I think that's very clearly assault, and I think we all agree on that. But with something like Aziz Ansari, I think the reason why it was so uncomfortable is because it's something that I think if a lot of us look back on our sexual histories, it's too close for comfort. And we don't want to wrestle with the idea that we may have been involved in something similar, where it's that kind of gray area of consent, that whole, I was not forced down, I didn't say no, I was uncomfortable, and this happened. And that's why I think it was really big, because it wasn't a clear-cut Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby situation.
Right. Because it was such like a, if I may say, relatable. Is that an okay word? I don't know. Like, it was something that I feel was very. It wasn't like, parang, how when it comes to like sexual assault and sexual harassment, the public opinion usually has like a perfect victim type of mentality. That is like crime. A perfect crime type of mentality. I feel like what Trisha said, this is not necessarily the perfect crime type of thing, where it's like, it's so mundane. Parang it's something I feel could like, parang it's something that I honestly have experienced. I heard it and I'm like, hold up. You know what I mean?
You're like, and wait, have I been sexually?
Yeah, it makes you think that. And I think that's also, I agree with Trisha, where it's like, oh yeah, like parang it has that oh yeah effect. Parang
Yeah, I can count on many. I count on at least one hand how many times this has happened to me, where I'm not like super comfortable with the sex, but I'll go through it with it anyway because it's easier than trying to get out of the situation.
Right.
Like it's like your danger levels aren't that high yet. It's not the if I don't get out of here, I'm going to die type of situation.
Right.
But sometimes it's also a fear of, if I don't go along with this, I don't know
what's gonna happen,
how they're going to react. So I've done that, and I may have even been on the other side. I may have been on Aziz Ansari's side, where maybe somebody else felt pressured into having sex with me because they just couldn't figure out how to say no.
I have absolutely been on both sides of the conversation. So, and I think a lot of people have, right? That's where it got really sticky. You want to talk about nuance, right? This is when people were really forced to confront where they were and draw lines on the subject, because before this it was easy. Rapists bad, believe women, yes. And then this one came out, and it wasn't the same as the other reports. It didn't have Ronan Farrow investigating. It came out on a website that nobody had ever heard of, where their oldest editor was 25 years old at the time of publishing, right? And it was not investigative journalism. It was the single account of one woman. So when you compare it, and yes, believe all women, but when you compare it to the research that had been done, the comprehensive uh, quote unquote journalistic integrity of the other reports versus this account that came out on a website called babe.com, right? People were starting to question their beliefs and their values as to how they're going to feel about this.
We have a question here from one of our customers. Customer Matt asks, had that experience, like if you didn't know or feel you're harassed, were you really harassed?
I think Trisha and I talked about this the other day when we talked about consent at Pride, right? Like, I think I brought up because we were talking about observation as participation, right? And the consent required in observing. And I said, what about that? And Trisha pointed out, if you go on a date with somebody who likes feet and you wear open-toed heels and they go home and masturbate to your feet without having ever told you, is that not the same thing? You were just like, it's not in your control anymore. So Trisha, what do you think?
I think that there isn't some magic line you can cross where you can go from not harassed to harassed. It's not like you meet a certain amount of number of criteria. It's not a certain number of feelings that you can check off. I think sometimes it's not as clear cut. Sometimes there are moments where you're like, was I harassed? If you felt it, then maybe.
Yeah. In feminist discourse, like a lot of feminists who would argue for this in this situation, what they often would argue is that harassment and like rape and assault, there's just murky boundaries around them, diba? So
Right.
and you know how in feminist discourse we would always put the victim, as we've talked about before, like the victim should have the as most say as possible in like recounting her experience. So the standard is often, if you feel that your boundaries have been crossed in some sense, that you feel na, okay, I was harassed or I was raped or assaulted, parang they're putting that whole idea is kind of trying to parang teach victims, or not, survivors rather, that their experiences mean something, that they have the agency and the power to say that this has happened to me, and I get to do what I need to do with it. Parang ganun.
I think if I could share a little story, because the reason why I wanted to talk about Aziz Ansari today, or the reason why his story resonated so much with me, is because this is kind of the experience I had when I was raped as well. We got our trigger warnings at the start of the episode, but I'm going to do another trigger warning right here. Because I did have this conversation with the person who did it to me, and it was kind of that similar. I didn't realize that it had crossed into a non-consensual part. It wasn't something where it was very explicitly like a no. And then there was a part when I started like pretending to be into it just because I thought it would be over faster. So when I read this account of Grace, I was just like, I know exactly how you feel. And it was very weird for me after, because even when I had acknowledged what had happened, had constantly asked myself, was I harassed? Was I raped? Is this something I had gone through? And I was trying to look to my feelings to kind of get an answer. It's like, I know other people who have been raped, and I'm not feeling the way that they're feeling.
Right.
I'm not. I hesitate to say not as traumatized, because that relationship did give me trauma in many other ways.
Right.
Does this count?
It's
like
like-
you're questioning
yeah,
yourself.
Yeah. I think, does this
Yeah.
count because I pretended to be into it? Does it count because I didn't say anything? Does it count because of this? And at the end of the day, it was like, did I feel harassed? And I don't think I would say that I felt harassed. But I kind of landed on the question, did I consent to this? And then the answer was no. So I may not have felt harassed or whatever that means, whatever that meant to me, but I didn't give consent. And there's one
Yeah.
word for that.
A woman who is drugged and asleep throughout the whole ordeal also never feels harassed, but that doesn't make her ordeal any
Right.
less, so it's not always,
Exactly.
again, we're talking about the nuance, and this is where the gray areas come in.
Definitely.
But the Aziz Ansari incident was interesting because at a time when powerful men were being brought down in a wave of sexual allegations, the account on Ansari was a divisive one. In one way, because it shouldn't have been. But articles from The Atlantic and the New York Times entitled The Humiliation of Aziz Ansari and Aziz Ansari is Guilty of Not Being a Mind Reader, respectively, expressed opinions that were decidedly more lukewarm than the fiery discourse that was prevalent at the time. The Atlantic article argues that the reaction of Grace's account was unfair since she could have been more proactive in removing herself from the situation, writing, "Was Grace frozen? Terrified? Stuck? No. She tells us that she wanted something from Ansari and that she was trying to figure out how to get it. She wanted affection, kindness, attention. Perhaps she hoped she would maybe even become the famous man's girlfriend. He wasn't interested. What she felt afterward, rejected yet another time by yet another man, was regret. And what she and the writer who told her story created was 3,000 words of revenge porn. The clinical detail in which the story is told is intended not to validate her account as much as it is to hurt and humiliate Ansari. It is worth noting that the author of this article is, I think, in her 50s and has been on the receiving end, has been a victim of sexual assault, I think, twice. She mentions in an article, or has had two brushes with sexual assault twice.
Right.
Okay.
And like as what
Right,
your
yeah.
show is saying, like it could be black and white. I mean, parang these experiences, we tend to kind of try to fit them into like boxes of like what the perfect victim is.
Mhm.
When at the end of the day, it's really about what you feel and what your values, morals, goals are
Mhm.
in terms of these situations.
Mhm.
For today's opening,
Oh wait, before we go to
oh
that, I
no,
just want to do a quick note on what that last person said about the New York Times, I believe,
Mhm.
where they're kind of assuming the intention on the part of Grace, where it's like
Mhm.
she just wanted to be his girlfriend, and she wanted fame and
Right.
attention. And I think
right?
it's just important for us to point out that that's a really disgusting approach to an
Yeah, no.
expose.
Yeah,
Super,
and
very
again,
mean.
these are so when these two authors on the subject, one who was very anti Ansari, and the woman who wrote that Atlantic article had a chance to talk on NPR. I have a clip from it where they actually get to voice their main points. Where the author Flanagan says, I mean, look at young women. I'm in my 50s. They've accomplished so much that is just, I mean, women my age just sit back in awe, Their goals for careers, the kinds of careers they go into, their fight to be paid equally to men, it's breathtaking. But then in this one core area, they're so weak, which is trying to jump into these, hookup situations. And then she goes to say, I have zero moralistic comment on that. But she says that essentially what they did to Aziz Ansari is unfair because it was one-sided, and they assassinated his character basically overnight. And the one who's anti-Ansari says, with regards to what do you think about the idea of if she didn't want it, she should have just left? This author says, I think, we'd love to get to a place where everyone feels completely empowered to say exactly what they want to do and exactly what they need to do to keep themselves safe. But I also think that the reality is that women get this message, that we've been getting this message for a long time. You have to be really nice to men. You have to reject them really nicely if you're going to reject them. And you have to kind of let them down easy. And you have to be sweet. And I think it can be pretty hard for women, especially young women, to switch gears from that messaging to suddenly, oh, now I need to advocate for myself. I'm going to advocate for myself in this really assertive way. So both very good points about the unfair treatment of Ansari and like what are women supposed to do? There's a disconnect between the ideal and the reality.
So I don't date men. All right. For today's opening up, we have an anonymous letter They write, I tend to fall for friends, but they never like me back. Ergo, I need to meet more people. I don't know how. As I opened up to experimenting, ta-da, pandemic.
Okay. Well, anonymous. Tend to fall for friends. Who has a lot of experience with that? What star sign usually falls for friends?
This is a very. Did I write this? Because
I
the
always like
task
to mention
me
this,
write this.
like Trisha and I tend to have the same standard when it comes to having sex with people. Like we like to only have sex with people who who are our friends. And I think for good reason. For me, personally, it's like it's because I know that I have a connection with this person already. And thus I know that the experience would be more like pleasurable, would be more fun because we're building off of something. Doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna get attached, but like there's a sense of attachment, but it's not like that romantic attachment you expect shit. I don't know. That's how I deal with it at least. I'm not addressing the question, am I? Your turn, Trish.
Okay, so as a person who falls for friends that don't always like her back or cannot like her back for reasons, one of the things I have found that helps me is, I know this is like some hippie juju, but it's unconditional love, really. It's just being able to accept that these are your feelings for them and being able to accept that they don't return it, and just accepting them for the relationship that they can give you.
Exactly.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
agree with
And
that.
then one day you'll follow for a friend who will also fall for you. So like,
Also, it's I think
Okay.
same.
one thing I wanted to like in relation to what Trisha said, all because a friend cannot meet the needs that you have in terms of liking you back doesn't mean you're not worthy of those needs.
Mhm.
Yes.
Like, and it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with you. It's just a matter of non-compatibility on that plane, you
Look, there
know?
are plenty of attractive, really cool people that you don't like, you
Or
know?
even not attractive, cool people who you might still like. Being attractive is overrated. I like Matt's advice. Actually, can we put up Matt's answer? He says, "My advice: befriend ugly people." I think that solves your problem right there. You stop falling for your friends, right?
No,
Like
because what
that,
is
man.
ugly? You know,
Okay,
what is
so
ugly? Nobody's
I don't
ugly.
think the problem of our listener though is that they're falling for their friends. I think the problem is that they need to meet new people. So if the question is how do I meet new people so I can have new friends to fall in love with, I suggest putting yourself out there. As I open up to experimenting, tada, pandemic. As we've discussed, I think in a past episode, we keep on promoting ourselves on the show. But yeah, go look for our past episode where we talk about love during the pandemic. Yep. There's so many ways to open yourself up to dating responsibly during this pandemic. And I would argue that there is an element to being in the pandemic, being in lockdown, that makes experimenting, seeing as how I think that's what you want to do, according to your letter, a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I hope you explore lots of different avenues. If you'd like to send us your anonymous questions or confessions, you can submit through our opening up form, which you can find in the episode description. Thank you, and now back to the discussion. Okie dokie. Here we get to uh, a relatively recent topic, actually, that we just got into. We touched upon it lightly, and I saved the best for last because it's almost like a non. It's a thing that gets brought up because people talk about it, but really it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. I had to go to the ever respectable Urban Dictionary for this one. All right,
Uh-huh.
a Puritan. I gotta say, man, that's such a good title for a band. A Puritan is described as an online child who is deeply uncomfortable with the sense that people online might present sexual characteristics and who proactively demands that people curtail behavior that they interpret as sexually suggestive. So just like obnoxious prudes. It's just look,
It's a fun name for obnoxious prudes.
it's a fun name for obnoxious prudes. I don't. Here's my one swear word for the episode. I don't give a shit about young people being obnoxious. All right, because I was young. I was obnoxious. Still am, dude. So when I hear that young people are being obnoxious about their beliefs, my question is not why are they being obnoxious. My question is what are their beliefs, though? Because if they're right about their beliefs, then fine, screw it, be obnoxious. I am under the belief, the philosophy that an obnoxious young person, even the alt right annoying people and the all super left SJWs, I do believe that they're going to mellow out eventually. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Like you know how like when you're starting out like believing in something or like getting into something, you swing from one end of the pendulum to the other and you're
Mm-hmm.
so into it and you're like, fuck
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I advocate for this shit. Swear word, ding ding ding. Um, like and later on you just as you get older, you're like, yeah, look at me back then. I'm learning to just come back to the
Yeah.
middle, you know?
I,
And
I I don't
you,
necessarily agree that you come to the middle. What I think happens is that you refine it
Ah,
mhm.
and
tama,
you
tama,
and
tama.
you focus it. So one thing a lot of leftists like to say is remember your narrowest target. Remember your target. Who are your targets? The people and institutions in power, right? You don't you try not to direct hate and death threats towards people who are like other workers, other people who have no power, other
Mhm.
people who may not have the education
Punch up, don't
to,
punch down.
yeah, exactly, punch up. So if there's someone being obnoxious and wrong, unless they're Jeff Bezos or Duterte, like let's remember who the bad guys are and
Mhm.
let's punch up. Let's attack it
Mhm.
from the root because these are all symptoms, man.
So the Puritans were used. The idea of children who are fed up with being bombarded by hot sex by the internet has inevitably come up recently during Pride Month. Well, you know what? I will say this. I was a child for a very long time. I don't know a lot of children right now because that'd be weird. But I have never fucking heard a child go like, you know what? Too much sex. No, no sex. We should absolutely protect the children and like give them responsible depictions of sex and educate them. But I just don't buy the idea that there's enough young kids going, don't like this, don't like being aroused. It's kind of our, you know, no, it's kind of our deal as teenagers is like we love being aroused all the time. Anyway,
Right? It's an
um,
indulgent
Get aroused
time.
at anything.
yeah, funny wind
Exactly.
blows. Where they would so it came up recently during Pride Month where they were used for the argument of accessibility of Pride and whether or not it was appropriate for children. We talked about it during No Kink at Pride, right?
Yeah.
And the only reason that the Puritans exist in the conversation this year, this month, last month actually, is because people were trying to weaponize them for Pride, right? There, when there was a little digging done, actual Zoomers say that's not the case. They say, I think you're seeing a very loud minority compared to what's really out there, says TikTok creator Alistair, which it's to be fair sounds like the name of a 19-year-old TikTok creator. Yes. Rebecca Jennings, a senior author for Vox, who has beforehand written about Gen Z's function within the online anti-porn movement, agrees that this might not be not a consultant of a whole technology. What we're actually talking about when we talk about the teens today is only the most extreme views, the ones that
Mm.
rise up to the talk of TikTok, Twitter, Tumblr, Reddit, that get the most engagement. Painting them all
Mm-mm.
with one sweeping brush isn't helpful because the vast majority likely have much more nuanced beliefs. Ah.
I
Oh
think this is a good
man.
rule of thumb. We've all been at a point or at a place in our lives where we look to the internet, we look to social media, we look to other people to tell us what to think,
Yeah.
and what positions to take. I honestly still do this, especially with issues I'm not super well versed in. I'll pick a person that I generally
Yes.
my beliefs generally align with, and I'll be like, okay, what do they believe in this? And until I can form a proper opinion, I just kind of hold that in my head for a while. But one thing you have to remember is that the loudest opinion isn't always the correct one,
Yeah.
Yeah.
especially with social media algorithms, which drive up negative engagement. So
In fact,
be vigilant.
there is an old adage that I love that goes something like I think it's a British adage because of course it is. Oh, Jesus. Somebody has awoken the Kraken. I have to edit that out in the future. All right. It goes the emptiest cans make the loudest noise. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
So I'm also
Yeah.
very wary because I'm now more aware than ever about how the news cycle tries to sensationalize topics to get more traction to keep itself relevant. And one of the best things I think I did to stop the fear mongering from getting to me was I stopped paying attention to the 24-hour news cycle. You know, I would just glance over the news, get the information that I need, do further research if I wanted, but not to let the news dictate like my view of the world based on information that I didn't get for myself. And
Right.
I think that's what the Puritans and no kink at pride movement stands for, right? It's that that old saying of a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And Puritans, no kink at pride, they both exist because of a little knowledge.
Well, that wraps up our discussions on how we talk about sex. I think
Yes.
we pretty much blasted that one out of the park. What are your major takeaways from this episode?
We should do
Um,
away with black and white thinking and blanket statements because there's a lot
yes.
of nuance.
I frequently because my YouTube is filled with gumbo of left and right ideologies. Just because
That's a good
my
thing, though.
yeah, no, but I stumbled onto it accidentally. Like the algorithm just decided for me that I must be like this far right guy because of my interests. I like watching gun videos,
Hmm.
right? And I like watching a lot of police videos where policemen chase down perps and like drop your gun, bang, bang, bang. And I watch these videos a lot, and then the algorithm started pushing like men's rights activist stuff onto my Jordan Peterson stuff about
Oh no.
about gun laws in the U.S. and about it started showing me conservative right videos, and before I knew it, the Hodge twins were popping up on my feed.
Did you get any
um
Ben Chappie,
yeah, Ben
Benny Chap?
Shapiro, yeah, that kind of stuff. And a lot of pro military, pro police, people who think that akab is a bad thing and stuff like that. And uh you know what, I watch it to stay informed on what the other side is saying, but more often than not I will find myself latching onto a thing that I agree with that they say, and then that's where I catch the voice in my head going, danger, danger, Will Robinson, right? Then you have to start assessing why it is you feel one way about a uh, like I'll give you one example. I like watching bodybuilding videos. Bodybuilding is like a weird hobby that I have. I follow amateur and professional bodybuilding, not religiously, but I enjoy it. Buff dudes. Um, and one of the channels was talking about like female athletes, trans athletes in sports.
Mm.
And up until that point, I was like, no, women are women. Let trans athletes compete. And then this guy who I like, what Trisha mentioned earlier, you look for somebody who you follow ideologically, and then you look for their opinions, right? Then he started coming out with all the science about why that's not right. But then I remembered, wait, no, we had a guest before, we had a trans guest before who said that research is BS. So what do I believe? And I short circuit myself on like a semi-weekly basis. I short circuit myself trying to assess my values and beliefs for the show, and I think that's a super healthy thing.
That's so important because, like, if you don't have any like differing opinion coming into your head, it becomes this echo chamber, and discourse doesn't move forward. You can't progress if everyone's like yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
things progress because someone says no. I think this is what should be, and you kind of like figure out like how to move forward from that. I think that's a really good practice. I agree with what you do.
Yeah, I think good rule of thumb is be curious, be
Mm,
critical with your curiosity. Know how to vet sources, and
Absolutely,
just
absolutely.
right, please vet your sources and try to take different points into account. Being fair and judging it for yourself doesn't mean that both sides are equal or both sides
Yes,
are the same. They're not in so many cases, but just understand where different things are coming from, so that you're just you're solid in your trust in yourself and how you can like
yes.
figure out what is true for you
All you
and
really
what
have to
what
do
bring what
is
makes sense.
all you have to do is to be able to defend yourself well and make
Yes.
sure that your knowledge on a subject that you are mouthing off about is not cursory or superficial, that you really looked into the subjects, because I think everything that we've discussed today, the conversations get the way they do because people don't get into it enough.
Awesome. So that's it. Do you want to promote anything? Your socials?
No, I'm good. I'm good. Good.
I'm good
Oh,
too.
I want to promote this anime on Netflix called "The Time I Was Reincarnated as a Slime." It's about this dude that gets like reincarnated in this fantasy universe, kind of like your average swords and sandals JRPG universe, but instead of being reincarnated as like a cool wizard dude, he is reincarnated as like a basic slime monster. You know the slimes you have to defeat in
Oh,
JRPGs.
Mm-hmm.
it's,
That's adorable.
it's hilarious. Yeah, you should check it out.
love it. Yukai?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, I'm the only one promoting. Now I feel like an idiot. Uh, I'm at Trisha O'Bannon. Follow me for cat pics and random rants against the Philippine Post Office. So you can also stay updated with Now Open by following us on Facebook and Twitter at Now Open PH. Our past episodes are available on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So we are uploading a bunch of backlog in the next coming weeks, and then we'll basically be caught up. So you can catch up on Spotify now. So make sure to stay tuned for that. And don't forget to join our Discord server to hang out with the hosts, fans, and friends of Now Open. And subscribe to our coffee page, coffee.com/nowopenph, to get bonus content and other special perks. So this is a very great time to subscribe because we're posting a lot of bonus content. We're gonna have sex toy reviews, movie reviews, Q&As. We also post the pre-shows, so what we do in the minutes leading up to the show. We also post that on Coffee, and we will be announcing to the VIP customer club on Coffee. Those are all of our monthly subscribers. Some really exciting things for our upcoming anniversary. So go to the Coffee, find out what we're doing before everybody else does.
I'm going to be making it OnlyFans. All right, yeah. Did you already mention the past episodes are up? Yeah,
Yeah.
Discord server coffee. Yeah, all right, cool. Next episode, uh, we are talking about what gets in between us when we talk about sex, contraceptives.
What do you mean it gets? I mean, it is literally physically
Literally,
in
yeah,
between
that's what I
you.
mean.
Okay, so let's see. We're going to be talking about contraceptives. So, everything you want to know, what they are, what your options are, where to get them, how to use them, all of it, all of the sexy, sexy things about contraceptives. So, same time, same place. See y'all when we next open. Fresh.
Ding, 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 ding. All right.
That
How
was
was
Yay!
so
that?
fast. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay.
That
Matt
Okay.
was
said very
good.
streamlined.
Yep. 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 Yep.
Whew.
Yeah.